Amen. Well, if you remember the song, because we're going to be reading in Ecclesiastes 3 today, and so if you've heard the song, Turn, Turn, Turn by Pete Seeger, he got it from these verses we're looking at. It's not the other way around, if you're wondering about that. So we're going to be looking at that today. Not that you're probably like, I was not confused. Yeah, there it is. It's about the response I get on all my jokes. So thanks for keeping it consistent. But yeah, so no, it's just what we've been doing in this series in Ecclesiastes is we're looking at the teacher. It says Koheleth, the teacher, Solomon, I believe, who's reflecting back on his life. He's looking back on the things that he pursued, just like all of us. This is why I said throughout these weeks we've been looking at it, this is important for us. This is an important book for us to look at because you and I, we're here in this world. No matter if we say it or not, we're all individually, we're looking out there trying to find purpose and meaning. We're trying to figure out what all this is about. I mean, some of us may be closer, some of us may be further down the line, but we're all still trying to figure out life. We're here, we're like, what is some of this stuff about? Sometimes you got it, and then other times you're like, I have no idea what this is about. And so that's what he's doing. He's going through all of this, and one of the phrases that he always said, or one of the things that he always found out at the end of each pursuit was everything is meaningless, or everything is vanity. And the name of the series, Hevel, that's the Hebrew word for meaningless and vanity. Everything is Hevel. And this is what it means. Hevel, smoke, vapor, temporary, fleeting, or insubstantial. So that's really what, you got to understand that to see where he's coming from in this book when he's writing this. This is what he's saying. This is what he means about life. I've tried all these things, and I just can't grasp what it's about. It's like it's trying to grasp smoke and just the air. And other times he says it's like chasing after the wind. I think I'm there, but it's like I'm chasing after the wind, and I just can't really catch it. And that just describes, I've seen that in my life, and I bet every single person here in some way or another, if you haven't, you're going to. There's my just encouragement, like you're going to try to grasp all this, and it's just going to like slip through your fingers. And just like what he's talking about there, it's like smoke. It's like it's vapor. Or you come to this, and it's like, I thought this was going to do it. I worked really hard, I pursued it, and I got to the thing that I was wanting. And it's not even part ways, it's like I got the exact thing that I was wanting, and it's just, it didn't do it for me. It's insubstantial. It just didn't really live up to the expectations that I built up in my mind. And I think that's a little bit of where Solomon is at right there. He says, I just couldn't find this. I don't have this quote on the screen, but Soren Kierkegaard, he said, every human being, no matter how slightly gifted he is, however subordinate his position in life may be, has a natural need to formulate a life view, a conception of the meaning of life and its purpose. I believe that's us. I think that's where Solomon's coming from. I think it's in here for a reason. I think all of us, we even come to church, even if you haven't ever read this book before, that's our life. That's just a thing we're trying to do in this world. Created beings, sometimes we're trying to figure out what this is all about. And so that's where Solomon's at. So we're going to be in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and I will put these on the screen. But Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8, I'm going to read those verses right now. It said, there's a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and time for peace. Let me put this on the screen first right here. There's just a time for everything. That's just kind of a summary of that little section right there. There's a time for everything. And I want us to get this as we're thinking about God's word here. We're thinking about where Solomon's at and everything he's going through here. But this is the driving point in this right here. There's a time for everything. As he goes through this, he's juxtaposing all these different points. He's looking at this saying, okay, there's this, but there's also this. There's this right here, and there's this. He's laying out all these things just like he does. It's perfect with this whole book of Solomon trying out all this stuff. The guy who could do all this, who had the money and the ability to try all these things, it's perfect in here to say, okay, you see this, but there's this. There's this right here that I bet some of you can relate with, but there's this over here too. There's this and there's this. And he just compares all these things, and he comes to that and just says there's a time for everything. And timing is important on all this. Timing in these activities is important because he talks about killing someone. Now that's a controversial thing. We can talk about that and we can say, well, there's never any time for this. We're not talking about murder here. We're talking about killing because he says killing is typically looked at as bad in all possibilities, but then he brings in war and he says sometimes there's a time for this. Sometimes it's justified in this time period, in this season, in this period of life, or if there's a war going on. He talks about there being justification for this. Sometimes there's a time for tearing things down, and sometimes there's a time for if you're building it up. And so he goes through all these and just kind of tells us that there's certain seasons for this. There's a time for dancing at a wedding, but there's not a time for dancing at funerals. You know, I mean, you look at that. It's just, he just talks about normal things in life that we really can understand and we can grasp on that. But our actions and timing are important to God. And this, I'll put this on the screen here. These seasons are appointed by God himself. These seasons are appointed by God. That's what we're seeing through this. And I want you to really understand that and grasp that. His plan in life involves these variety of different experiences in us. And we're going to go through that. And again, this isn't anything that you don't know. You just as you live, you see this. There are different experiences in life. There are different literal seasons in life that we see, that we face. It's just going to happen. That's just how it is. Solomon went through and said, it's just going to be this way. The sun's going to rise. It's going to fall. There's going to be different seasons. All this stuff is going to happen. And God uses all these things. And then he really kind of talks it, and you think about it this way. There's a time for weeping, but it's not all weeping. There's laughter sometimes. So he's pulling those out and said, okay, yeah, there's time for this right here. There's time for these sad times, but there's also laughter there. So there's seasons for them. There's places for them. You see them just in our life. He's made everything. This is the key. We'll read here in a minute. We won't get to this verse now, but we'll get to it in a second. But in verse 11, he talks about there's just a time for everything, and everything is beautiful in its own time. There's a proper time for everything. I was looking at this. Now I'm not ever going to look into making tapestries. I don't know if you've looked at that, but I actually did in my sermon. I looked up like a YouTube video, watching something. It was like 8 minutes. I sit there and watched it. I've got a life. But I watched how they made these tapestries, because I thought about it with this. And if you've ever watched or if you've ever made tapestries, I don't know, it's an extremely detailed, long process of them taking all these, yarn, I guess, strings and everything. They string it up. They have all this stuff, and they've got them all there, and it just looks like strings, like a big guitar. I can't even describe this. I should just stick to my notes here, but it's just, I don't know. It was a big mess, and they have all these strings, and then they have this design back there, and they're like looking at it, and they're stringing all these things together. And really, if you look at it from behind, how they're doing it, it just looks like a big chaotic mess. It's these strings hanging down, and they're tied up, and it's just hanging down, and it's just very intricate, just very detailed. And some of them, it says it takes like years to make these things, but they're working very hard, just in detail, putting these things together. Now, like I said, in the middle of it, it just looks like a chaotic mess. But in the end, when you see what they've done, it's a masterpiece. When you see all the details that they put into that. And I want you to see the picture there. That's our life. That's this world sometimes. I'm not saying I fully get all this, but I see it from Scripture, and I understand my life, and I understand this world, and I see the chaotic mess that's around, and it's like, if I think about it that way, it's like it looks like a mess from my perspective. I just don't get this. But what I get, what I believe, what I see, and sometimes you get glimpses of this, is like God is forming this masterpiece. He's working things out. He's doing things. We don't always get it. We don't always accept it. We don't always believe it. But I think he's always working things out. He's doing something there. It's like us, if we could back up from all of this and see it from his perspective, it would make sense. That's the problem, is just we can't, though. You can't always do that. I saw another guy, too, and maybe you've seen these videos, where this guy's painting, and it's in a church. So I'm like, okay, I know that the first time I saw it, I'm like, okay, so I know this is something to do with Christianity. He's at a church. I don't know exactly what he's doing, and there's probably music back there, and he's all, he's artistic and moving around in his way. I guess it's for the show or whatever, but he's painting this stuff, and maybe I'm like everybody else, and I'm like, what is this guy do? Like, who hired this guy? Like, what is he? Is this somebody's like nephew that needs a job? And they're like, I don't know what he's painting. And then he does all this, and then he flips it around, and it's like a picture of Jesus, but upside down, you're looking at it and all this painting, and you're like, this guy, all he's doing is throwing paint on this and dancing in front of us. Like, this is crazy. But it's a masterpiece when he flips it around, and you see what he was trying to do, and it makes sense. And again, I want you to see that. That's what I believe about sometimes this chaotic mess of a world. Like, there's a plan behind it. God is doing some things. That he has given us freedom to make some choices and do stuff, but it's like he's doing stuff behind the scenes, and I really want us to understand that. I believe that's where Solomon was. I think that's what he's kind of looking back on as he's looking at his life, and he's saying, this is what I saw. I tried all this stuff, but there's a reason. There's seasons for all this stuff. God planned all this stuff out for a purpose and for a reason, even though I didn't know what it was. But now I see that, and he's kind of passing that knowledge along to us, and he's letting us know. Now, let me go, like I was saying, a little bit further here. I want to read this. Ecclesiastes 3, 9 through 14. So he read all that, and then he says, what do workers gain from their toil? I've seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He's made everything beautiful in its time. That was that verse I mentioned. He's also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there's nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it so that people will fear him. There's a lot in those verses, and I'll even put this on the screen. Sometimes I think we're ignorant of God's timing. Again, I don't say that to be mean to us. It's just, we got to grasp that. We got to understand, okay, look, I get it. Sometimes we can sit around and we can talk and be like, why is this happening? There's things that I want to plan in my life. Sometimes I want to plan here and do stuff, and it's like, that's just it. We're ignorant sometimes to his timing. Like, what are you doing here, God? I don't know what it is. I always say this because I don't want to sound like a know-it-all, or like I don't want you to come to me after and be like, okay, I get what you're saying, Kyle. Now specifically, what's going to happen here in my life? I don't know. I'm just being honest. I'm looking at Scripture and I'm seeing, like, this is what God says. Like, sometimes, most of the time, we're ignorant to what his timing is. Like, he's doing something there. He's got a timing. He's got a timetable, but we just don't see it. We don't really understand it. And that's kind of what he's getting at there. He's talking about this big mess that could be our life or just this world. Like, there's something going on behind the scenes. He's really doing something there. So as I look through those verses, what he's talking about, he says, what do people gain from their work? I just picture him saying, okay, we have this work, we have this toil, this kind of burden in life. We're doing these things. But then Solomon's like, okay, I get a little bit of this. I get it, God. You're in control. Which that's the hard part for some of us. Some of us more than others. Like, God is in control because we want to have control. That's one of the reasons I hate planes, because I'm not in control of it. If I was in control, I would crash it and stuff. But still, I just would feel better if I was in control of it, and then I would die and I wouldn't be here. But that's my mess that I'm in right there. But it's like, we look at this and we want control. And part of it, that's what we struggle with. And I think Solomon's saying, okay, I get it. Okay, this doesn't make any sense to me, but you got it. You're in control. And everything is beautiful in its own time. And you see his thought process. He's kind of working through all this. And it gets kind of deep. And then he goes to that part and he says, really, when sin entered the world, this is what I think about. When sin entered the world, just see at the beginning, you can go back and you just see us as humans. Like, we've strive like effortlessly, restlessly, just striving to make something of ourselves, to achieve, to build, to grow things, to conquer things. I mean, we do that. That's a part of us. And when we try to do all these things, and maybe you do a little bit, but then we're not in control of everything. And I think he's saying there's this frustration in us. I know that. I see that even before I came to know Christ. There was this kind of frustration in me of like, it wasn't saying that I was completely not knowledgeable of him or didn't believe in God, but I was struggling with that. And so it was hard for me to understand living for him, because I wanted to have control. And it's frustrating because you do some things and then you understand a little bit, even though you don't admit it, that you understand that you're not in control of everything, that there's something going on around me that I have no control over, even though I'm trying to achieve and I'm trying to conquer. And it brings up one of the things that he was talking about eternity in our hearts. And I'll say it this way up here on the screen. We all have a sense of eternity in our hearts. What he was talking about there, he said eternity in our hearts. C.S. Lewis called this the argument from desire, or the argument from longing, if you've ever read anything about C.S. Lewis. The argument from desire, the argument from longing, that there's just this desire inside of us. No matter what you believe, no matter how many gods you believe in or no gods, there is just inside of us, I think there's just this longing, this desire. No matter what we believe, it's just, there's got to be something. We think, we strive. You can even watch TV that is in Hollywood that is just not Christian, and they're always putting something out there about the afterlife, heaven. Well, I think it's going to be this way. It's going to be this way. When I die, I'm going to see so-and-so. They're going to come back, watching over me. All these ideas, that's just, I think, inside of us. We have this desire of something more. And he talked about that, and where did that come from? I was reading about this Jewish atheist writer by the name of Franz Kafka. And in his writings, it was pretty depressing, some of the things he was writing about. He was striving for things. He was striving for life. And I think he really would relate with Solomon here of trying to search for things, trying to find meaning in life. And even in his writings, it just came across as depressing. And in his worldview, he just kind of summed it all up in, there's a goal, but there is no way. There's a goal, but there's no way. So what he was saying is I see this, we're all striving for purpose and meaning, and we want to have this. I'm just like all of you. All of us here have some goal. We're striving for something, but then he just came to the conclusion, but there's no way. And that was where he was just kind of depressed and down and everything. And he wrote a lot of stories, and he wrote this one it was called The Hunger Artist. And it was kind of interesting, but it was just because it's his writing and you kind of see his mind and how he's thinking. He wrote this thing called The Hunger Artist, and it was about this guy who was a professional faster, didn't eat, like we talk about in church, fasting. And so he would do this as a living. He would put himself in a cage, just put on this black tight suit or whatever, this is some magician type thing or whatever. And he's in this cage, and he fasted for long periods of time. And people came around and paid, it was a show. They watched him. They had music, they had dancers around. And people came. People were excited. It's weird. I guess I was going to say that's what, put food on the table, but he got paid to not eat. So it was that's what he did. And it was exciting for a while. But then it said in the story, after a while, it got old to people, and they've seen it, it's the guy, he's just fasting. There's not much really there. I can't really imagine paying to just watch somebody sit there and not eat. I'll do that. You guys can pay me for an hour. But then the story, it says it goes on, and he couldn't find work. It wasn't as big anymore, so he hired himself out to a circus, and it became kind of a side act, and they had him in the back, and they forgot about him. He was back there with the animals, and he went longer than the period that he normally did of fasting, and they came back and they found him dying, and he gave away his secret of how he could fast for so long, and he said, well, I would eat like everybody else here, but I've never found anything that satisfied my hunger. He said, I would pig out like all of you, but there's nothing that really satisfies me. And that's what he came to. And that's really, you see, Franz's philosophy in life, and where he's striving for this. He's saying, I wanted to find this, but I couldn't find any meaning. Yeah, I think there's a goal, but there's no, you can't find it. Nobody finds it. And that's where he was. And I think that's what C.S. Lewis is talking about. There's this longing inside of all of us. But unlike him, and I think I agree with C.S. Lewis, is that there is an answer. And I believe, I know I'm a Christian and I'm not coming in, out of left field here. I believe it's God. I believe it's all found in him. And I think that's the whole thing that was going on here with Solomon and what he's saying there, he's doing this life. He's striving to find meaning, to find fulfillment, just like this guy did, while putting God on the shelf over here, putting him to the side, and I'm going to try to find fulfillment in this world without him. And there's going to be some fun along the way. I'm going to do some things. I'm going to figure some things out, but it's just that idea of heaven, and I've been using this for a while, it's that idea of heaven, you squirt it, and that was not supposed to happen. And this illustration is now heaven. It's just, it's squirted. You'll just picture that. It's like smoke, and you grasp at it, and it just slips through your fingers, and it doesn't do anything. And that's what he's coming from. That's what he's saying. And that's where I think all of us can find ourselves if we do life without God in our life. If we put him on the shelf and we go over there and say, I'm going to do this without you. That's what happens. You're going to find some fulfillment. I'm not saying you're never going to smile. You're never going to have any type of happiness. It's like saying an atheist can't be moral. Sometimes that argument comes out and it's no, it's not that. It's there is no fulfillment. We can't find that. We're going to be searching for something. We're always going to be grasping for it. And that meaning of life, what is this all about? It's going to continue to slip through our fingers, and we're never going to find it without God. And that's where he was. You're never going to get it. There's this idea of eternity, but without God, this is where the frustration comes in. I think you're there, and it's like, I feel this. I know that there's got to be something more. There's got to be something out there past this life. I just know it, but I don't really understand what it is. 1 Corinthians 13:12, I have this up here, says, speaking of our life now, and then later, it says, for now we see only a reflection as a mirror. Like, this is you and I. For now we only see as a reflection in the mirror. It's like, it's not clear. It's this idea of not a really clear mirror. Like, you see a little bit, but you don't fully understand what it's all about. But he says, then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. It's talking about us in this life now. Now we get a little bit. We can read Scripture. God reveals some stuff to us. And so we got this idea. There is an eternity. God's there. Even us, we come here and we meet because we believe this. We come here and we're like, I get this. There is God. There's something more. But if we were to sit here and talk about like fully comprehending God in heaven, we're all here like, and I don't have a clue. We just have pictures of it, but it's a blurry picture. And he says, now I know in part, but then I shall fully know, even as I'm fully known. God completely knows us, and he says, now you guys just have a small picture of it. This is the frustration sometimes with us, and this is the frustration we have when we don't trust in God, and we try to do this ourselves. It's hard. It's going to be frustrating. You're going to be down. You're going to maybe be depressed. You're going to be striving for things. You're going to try everything to try to fulfill whatever that desire is, but it's just going to slip through your fingers. And I think that's what he's saying. So my summation of all of that, just looking at it, is we're all searching for meaning and purpose and fulfillment in life, but it can only be found, just in the most simple way, but it can only be found in that relationship with God. We're all searching. It's there. It's God has put it there. I believe he's put it in every single human being, regardless of what you believe. That's what I think. You don't have to believe in God. He's put that in us. He's put this desire for us. And I think if we all were honest, we would say, okay, I believe that to be true. There's this wanting. I want there to be something out there. I don't know if there is, but I feel it. I feel like there's something more than just right here. And so all this chaotic mess, maybe the way we describe it, God gives us little pictures, and he says, but I'm doing something through all that. I'm working this out. This looks like a mess, and it may take a while for you to see this. This is a mess right here. It's like that tapestry, but it's in my perspective, what I'm doing, this is going to be a masterpiece. I've got a plan here. I'm working this out. You're a part of this. It can be painful. That's the part you and I are like, yeah, this is the hard part. I want it to be easy. I want it to be nice, and it's hard. I want it to be easy for you guys. I don't want us, we come together as a church, and it's like, how can we help each other fix some of these things? And sometimes we can't. Sometimes we're helpless, and we just say, I just got to pray to God and just trust in him, and we have to do that. But he's doing something there. And he says things like we're new creations when we come to know Christ. So he does things. He does things in our mind. He starts to help us to understand things, and he helps us to grasp things more in our life. And so things like this, in Romans 8:28, I'll put this on the screen. It says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. So we have verses like this, and it's not something that we just say. It's something just to like make us feel better. It's not just sayings, or like when we say, I once was blind, but now I see. We don't just say things like that. It's not just church language, like we just throw around as just something we can write on Facebook, hashtag blessed or whatever. But we're not just making up some things here just to throw it out there so we can have some church language. When we come to know him, when we trust in him, he does this. There's these verses that maybe didn't make any sense to us, but the more you trust in him, the more you give control over to him. It's like, now you go back to these verses, and it's like, I get what he's trying to say here. This is speaking about my life. While I don't understand what he's going to do, I get it now that he can turn these things around for good. He can use this broken mess that is my life. He can do something here, and that's what he's talking about. He says, I want you to grasp that. I want you to grasp that in your heart. I want you just to learn to trust in me. And for me, this will be my last verse. I'll read it up here, but for me, this Galatians 6:9, I think about this in ministry. so much. I pray about this. We prayed about it even this morning, and I pray about it at home, and I even said it up here, I think, or whatever. I love seeing people get saved. And look, this isn't me. It's not like, in all honesty, sometimes it does hit me. It's like, well, if I say things a certain way, somebody will understand. Maybe they'll get saved. I'm just admitting to you that that's just in my human nature. I think all of us in some way, unless you're just better than me. Like, sometimes you just think, like, if I can say this right, then maybe they're going to get saved. We almost put that on ourselves. So I know God's the one who saves people, but I just want to be a part of that. I just want to see, like, when he does allow me just to be a part of him saving somebody, like lead them in prayer, and I'm there, and it's like he's doing it, but he just in his grace and just how awesome he is, he just kind of allows me to be a part of that sometimes. I love that. So I'll pray for that sometimes. And when I don't see it enough, whatever enough is, like, I'm like, God, you got to meet your quota for me, or whatever that is. Sometimes when I don't see it enough, when I want to see it more, I pray for that. And sometimes it can get frustrating. And I don't know where you are. Maybe in your life, sometimes you can get frustrated. You don't see things happen. I'm reminded of verses like this, what he's talking to us. He says, let us not become weary in doing good. For at the proper time, you bring in Ecclesiastes 3, for at the proper time, we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. That's great news. That's not my words. I didn't just come up with that. That's the God of the universe. He's saying that to us. And the more we trust in him, the more we just follow him and live for him. And he does that changing in your mind. And he opens it up and he allows you to see these things. And just, I don't know. You can just call it a feeling or whatever, but I think he opens up your heart and your mind to be able to understand this more and to accept it and to get through hard times. And just to trust in him. So when you come to those, and you come to Romans 8:28, and you just come to our lives, and you say, God, I know you're there. I know you're in control. I know you're great. I know you have all this under control. For me, it's like the more I live for him, the more I can say those comments that I just said and actually believe them. There was times when I would just say them like, maybe if I just say them enough, I'll believe it. God, you're in control. You can do all these things. I know you're doing something out here. But the more I trust in him, the more I live for him, the more I can say those things. And I'm like, I'm different now. Like over there, God, I know you know all this, but I was just saying those words because I was supposed to. That's a Christian thing to say. But now I actually believe it, or actually kind of believe it. Maybe you're just there. But he takes us along and reveals it more and more. And he just wants us to come to that place where we just trust in him completely and totally. That's what he's saying there. I think that's what Solomon is really looking at there. And he says, you just kind of see his mind maybe kind of opening up as he goes along there. And he just was saying that's what it's about, learning to trust him through all of this mess in life. I don't know the answers. I've said that before to you guys. I don't know what specifically he's doing. I can't tell you specifically what he's always doing in my life. But what he says is to go back to these words, and sometimes it's just generalized to us, but it's perfectly enough for what he wants us to know. And the main thing is he's saying, I just want you to trust in me. Just trust in me through this process, through this time. I'm doing something here. May not be what you think, but I'm doing something here, and there's a time for everything. There's a purpose for everything. You guys, I want to end right there.